Hi, Misha here, and happy 4th of July. Just trying to think of what we could bring out. We were out here doing some cabin work, and got to bring an American gun. Had some 5.56 in the bag for something else. And I realized this has not been out in a while. This is my XM177E2 clone, and this is one of the old Troys. And I know since these came out, there have been a lot of others, Brownells, even the Colts. But you know, I'm not going to say this is the best, most authentic. However, I always like the price point, and nothing that was significantly better has come along yet. All the other guns, they have their own issues. For example, this originally an XM177 would have an 11.5-inch barrel plus a 4.3-inch moderator, meaning, yeah, 15-inch overall barrel. So even if you pin on the moderator, yeah, it won't work. So what Troy did, they went to a 12.5-inch barrel, and they pinned on a faux moderator. Now the military ones, of course, had internal baffling, which was reclassified in the 70s to be a sound suppressor because it reduced sound by like 1 decibel. So anyway, unless you want to pay for an NFA flash hider, that's not a deal. The Colt, what they did, they have this on here, but it's reverse threaded, meaning it actually screws into the barrel way up here, meaning it has the Colt has a 14.5-inch barrel. And that shouldn't matter, but it does. The Colt is noticeably heavier at the muzzle than this Troy. And since it is double the price, I just kept my Troy. And it's pretty much stock as is, 2-position telescoping metal stock. I did swap out the Troy handguards. They were replica 6-holes. I put on Colt 6-holes back when these were available. It does have an original A1 grip. And actually this upper is an original part from Canada. And then the lower is a replica A1 with some pretty decent replica markings. One thing I still need to do is put on a proper A1 port door. You know what's really sad? I've got one at home. I've got an A1 gray port door. I just haven't put it on yet. On the other hand, it does have the proper castle nut in the back. And just generally has been a good gun for me. But like I said, we haven't had it out in a while, so I thought we'd see how it's running in 2024. As always, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. Like to help us out, check out Patreon. And once again, happy Independence Day, 4th of July, to everyone out there, YouTube land. With that, let's dust her off. Didn't hold, well, had something there. Yeah, that was the last round, so with that, it could be a mag deal. We'll investigate. This day was kind of boring, so it's nice to have something. I don't think it is the ammo, because that ammo has worked in many other guns for us. And I would be surprised if it were the Troy, because I've had it for a number of years and it's just never given troubles. But anything is possible. That said, yeah, mags. And luckily I brought a full pouch out. This is the early style pouch, first made for the 20-round mag. Holds 4. Let's try a different mag. That seemed clean.
Looks good.
So, gonna try a couple more, but preliminarily could just be a weak spring in that mag. These are the older 20-round mags, so yeah, I don't really know their history, frankly. These Troys did ship with a sling. It was actually a utility strap that was repurposed and slightly modified to work with the unique sling arrangement, namely on this stock gear for the XM177. And you can tell by the name, this was not a fully adopted, officially done gun. It was considered an experimental gun. I know that a lot of folks think this was very common in Vietnam, but the truth is, not very many were ever in theater in Southeast Asia. And honestly, not all that many were even ever purchased by the DoD. By 1965, the U.S. government, primarily the Army and the Air Force, were expressing interest in AR-15 carbines, and Colt was really planning to make a whole family. Initially, they wanted to call it the CAR-15, not this one, but the whole family. This would lead to testing and trials, and then June 1966, the Department of Defense would place the first carbine order for 2,815 pieces, and there would be 2 variants in this order. The difference? With or without forward assist. The Army insisted on it, the Air Force didn't like it, and the Navy was kind of in between, not really seeing what all the fuss was about one way or the other. So they purchased both the Colt Model 609 and the Model 610. The 609 had it and was designated as the XM177, but not E2, but rather E1. The 610 was designated as the XM177, at least kind of provisionally. Both had the improved stock and buffer introduced with this new line, and both had the 7-inch carbine length gas system with the slim handguard, single heat shield. Neither would have a bayonet lug, although it's possible some early concepts would just have it remaining like an appendix. But they had a 10-inch barrel. As I said at the beginning of the video, this has an 11.5. And the earliest ones would actually just have a standard birdcage flash rider, or 3-prong even, perhaps. But soon, once the order was placed, Colt would develop the first moderator. Not this size, but actually the previous roughly 3.4-inch version. And of course, these would still be 1 in 12 twist, non-chromed anything, with acceptance between late summer of 66 and March of 1967, and they were transported over to Vietnam as quick as they could because they really needed them. Let's try another mag. Clean. So immediately after the first order was delivered, April of 1967, the government placed a second order because Colt had a somewhat product improved model. And now we come to the XM177E2 here. Everything is pretty much the same. The only internal change, it had a chrome-plated chamber. Not bore, just chamber. And they extended the barrel from 10 inches to 11.5. That was to allow this boss here so that the XM48 underbarrel grenade launcher would fit. No bayonet lug. And we went away from the 3.4 moderator to the 4.3 with these extended flash slots. They went to this new Delta slip ring. While I'm not going to say earlier guns couldn't have it, I will say that by the time of the E2, it was. Those were the major important differences. And of course, the XM177E2 is very famous, very important. And a lot of movies about Vietnam, Platoon, make you think these were everywhere. And they were certainly being issued. They would go to guard units, guys on point. They went to the Green Berets, SOG, basically Spec Ops recon units operating sometimes in areas they shouldn't have been. But yeah, this was a very light gun. I mean, for the day and time, the M16 was light. This was even lighter, like 6 pounds. And it could be reasonably compact. I mean, 30 inches, give or take. So, yeah, makes sense. How many was in this next big order? 510 pieces. So, Colt had its second order. These are still designated as XM experimentals. And because it was relatively small and straightforward, they were all delivered by September, October of 1967. Troy. Those who remember when these came out, they were a big deal. This was before the retro craze had really hit at least full production. You could buy the parts, like I remember buying really good replica moderators from Brick back in the day. But not one was really doing these because it was hard to get things like the pencil barrel. It was a good price point, and they even donated to veterans organizations, which I'm very much in favor of, especially to support those who served and those who were wounded. But this was not the first model they released. It came out soon, but actually, before it. And we'll try the fourth mag I brought today. See that brass, the reason it does that, it's a feature. It was to throw Charlie off in the jungles. Held open.
I don't buy it.
Troy released their take on the GAU-5AA, the GAU-5A/A. Now, this one looks a little different. I've mentioned what I did here in other videos. But, just as reality, in the beginning, the only difference with the two guns was a forward assist on the Colt Model 629, which would become the XM177E2, and no forward assist on the Colt Model 630. Yeah, I know some sources claim it was called the 649. They're wrong. It was the 630. Now, designations in the Air Force. If you're confused, that's fine. So is the Air Force, because their classification system really didn't have a spot for this type of gun. So they kind of wedged it in, and the Army was kind of spearheading procurement, and the Air Force was kind of getting from them. It's an interesting thing, but not really for this video. Going back to the original 10-inch guns, like I said, the 609, that was pretty much an Army gun. The 610 without the forward assist was the XM177, at least on paper, but the Air Force designated it as the GAU-5A. But by the time of the 11.5-inch gun, the Army didn't really designate the non-forward assist version, so it was just the GAU-5A/A, which is what they went for here. And my deal was, I got this first, then this, and I kind of wanted both, but I couldn't really justify keeping both when the difference really was the forward assist. Now, I do like that they did a good job of the teardrop. As I already said, wasn't crazy about the original handguards, so I swapped them out on both. But, I had a little fun with this. I turned my GAU-5AA into a GUU-5P, keeping the XM177E2 stock. If you want to do a GUU-5P clone, you're pretty much free to do whatever, because the Air Force was too. There was just kind of one NSN number, and they were 80s rebuilds, at least for the most part, of older GAU-5A and AAs. But that was kind of the dark time for AR carbines, so let's back up and go to 1968 again. In June of that year, a study was concluded looking at the effectiveness after a year, and it had mixed results. There was goods and bads, but ultimately it was decided not to really pursue, not to go into full adoption, not to really even buy more. And of course, by this point, the XM16E1 was the M16A1, and that really was a good product improvement. It really, really was. And for the most part, the A1 was good enough as a rifle because it was shorter and lighter than the previous M14. So that's it. I mean, you have the numbers we already mentioned, plus 50 or 100 earlier versions, maybe like the 605, and the Navy SEALs tried out the 607. But you're looking at under 3,500 of these officially purchased. Now that said, they were rather highly valued and prized, so the same gun was often recycled over and over and over. And even though, and I'm guilty of this too, we think of the XM177E2 and GAU-5AA, they were less common than the original 10-inch versions. And even though they were better, more reliable, a little better accuracy, they were far from product perfection. J-Ro didn't like my Charlie story, but I said, you know, it's probably as legitimate as any others. Okay, I'm cycling back around to the second mag, the one that worked for us the first time. So let's see. Alrighty, with that, I'm going to say, yeah, that first mag, because it was on the last round, probably just has slightly weak little spring, and the feed couldn't quite keep up with the cycling of the bolt.
She's smoking pretty good.
Yes, indeedy. The XM177s really are the forerunners of today's M4 and M4A1. And Troy said they were doing these originally to commemorate and honor the Sun 2 prison camp raid, November 21st, 1970. Even though no new carbines had been delivered, they were still very much in service, and this was a joint raid between the Army and Air Force, about 150 special operations personnel, and they successfully executed the raid and hit their target, but unfortunately for everyone, the prisoners, the POWs there, had been moved a short time earlier, so it was a successful failure. But this became quite iconic because of it, and really proved the value of a carbine. When this was reclassed as a, well, the original version, not this one, as a sound suppressor, that did not just affect the American civilian market. It actually hurt Colt for exports. It infinitely complicated things. So between that and the fact that the government really wasn't all that interested, Colt would actually discontinue the 629, 630 line at the end of 1970. But this would not be the end of development. A very important model to come after was the 653, and that replaced the 11.5-inch barrel with the first 14.5-inch barrel. And almost by accident, they cured the rifle's accuracy, flash, noise problems, and it could now take a bayonet. So that's kind of neat. And the Army and Air Force would purchase the 653 in small numbers, and there would be a few different export models that were sold overseas. And while it wasn't a runaway success, it did successfully replace and improve and go from there. I turned my Force GAU-5A into a mutt, swapped out the metal 2 position for a Fiberlight 2 position. That was a common thing. And I actually pulled the 11.5-inch barrel, well, okay, the 12.5-inch, I should say, and replaced it with a Colt pencil barrel from a 6520 I found. Don't worry, I didn't take apart a 6520. The barrel was loose. Now, of course, that had a 16-inch barrel, not 14.5, but it does have the correct pencil profile. It's threaded, it has an A1 birdcage on it, bayonet lug, so that's cool. There's just one small issue with the bayonet lug. Generally speaking, that 1.5 inch of extra barrel doesn't matter, right until you try to mount an M7 style bayonet on here. Comes here, we've still got this to close. So when you pull it back, well, bad things happen. It absolutely will lock on, but because it can't reach the flash hider, it is very loose. It's quite loose on a modern day medium heavy barrel, but an old pencil like this, it is super loose. So, yeah. Oh, well. Hey, originally the gun didn't even have a bayonet lug at all, which is correct. The XMs and the GAUs did not have them initially, although the GAU-5Ps often would. The original rifles would have had a 1 in 12 twist, which definitely isn't the greatest for a barrel under a foot long. These being newer production, they came with a 1 in 7. It's an internal change, and it does actually make them a better gun effectively. Still, I guess I would have preferred a 1 in 12, but I mean, when these came out, they were about $1,000, if memory serves. Again, it's been several years, so forgive me, but they weren't extraordinarily expensive. And they were among the first to do replica receiver markings. Today, that's a much more common feature, but back then it really wasn't. And they put the Troy markings out of the way. Keep in mind, too, these predate the Colt replicas by several years and even predate the Brownells and certainly predate the efforts by Palmetto State. Another thing, this doesn't have the actual Colt gray anodizing. That is actually shockingly hard to find someone to do these days. Rather, it just has a Cerakote finish. These guns are, like I said, not perfect. But for the money, less than half the cost of a Colt, this really is good enough, because at the end of the day, a replica is a replica is a replica. And I bought these to have fun with, customize, and take to the range. And let Jero try the XM out before we lose daylight.
For a little bit of Happy Birthday America time.
When I was loading up to go shooting, I was trying to think of an American gun that had not been fired in a while. And also considering the whole prison camp raid reason for doing these, at least partially, of course, at Troy. It seemed appropriate. It felt right. I don't know. I wanted to. I hope you enjoyed it too. I'm also happy that it turns out really it was just a dud of a mag. And even then, that kind of last round failure, that's not a mag I'm just going to throw out. I'll just mark it and know that it's range mag. I might try to put a different spring in it or stretch the existing spring out. And you know what? It only happened once, so it really just could have been a fluke, but I won't trust the mag completely ever again. That's just how it is. But with these older 20s, yeah. And these, of course, will take mag pulls and everything, but yeah, you're not going to do this and put a mag pull in it. But what do you think? I just think it's a really fun gun, interesting part of history. While the Air Force would do the GAU-5Ps in the 80s, the Army would continue to issue and reissue and cannibalize their existing XM177s, but they would still keep them with their original barrel lengths, kind of just using them till they fell apart. That would lead to kind of the Black Hawk Down, Carbine, the experimental XM4, and then eventually, of course, the M4 beginning in 1995, which, frankly, same length buffer system, same length gas system, same basic AR thing. I mean, cosmetically, there's a lot of differences, but a lot of the parts are still very much interchangeable between these, even to this very day. It's kind of fun that it all goes back to the XM177 or the GAU-5A. With that, hope everyone has a great Independence Day. I would just kind of ask everyone to remember we're all Americans and should be in this together. And yeah, we can have our differences, we can have our disputes, but keep that in mind that we're kind of all brothers and sisters in this and should really keep what's important in mind. Best wishes from all of us. And if you could, please like, share, and subscribe. All that good fun stuff. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.
America!